All right, I think we can begin. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Elizabeth Gareeb, Executive Director of the Wildenstein-Plattner Institute, and I'd like to welcome you to today's event, Beyond the Block, the Public Art of Romare Bearden. This program is part of the WPI's continuing research effort for the Romare Bearden Catalog Raisonné, and we hope it gives you an insight into the extraordinary breadth and depth of the artist's production. If you would like to learn more about the WPI's work on this project, obtain information on how to submit a work for possible inclusion in the Catalog Raisonné, or browse the digitized material from Bearden's archives, please visit our website, wpi.art. For today's program, we'll be hearing from the custodians of New York City public art collections, which house examples of Bearden's work. Our speakers will be in discussion for about 45 minutes, at which point they'll be joined by Catherine Huff, the WPI's researcher for the Bearden Catalog Raisonné, who will be taking questions from the audience through the Q&A feature. So please make sure to put your questions in the Q&A feature and not the chat feature. Before we begin, I'd like to take this moment to introduce you to our moderator, TK Smith. TK is a Philadelphia-based curator and cultural historian whose writing has appeared in Art in America, Art Papers, and the Brooklyn Rail. Currently, TK is a doctoral candidate in the history of American civilization at the University of Delaware. And now I will turn the mic over to TK, who will be introducing our guest speakers. TK?
Thank you so much. And howdy, everybody. It's great to be here. I'm going to quickly introduce our two guests, and then we're going to get into it. So the first one I'd like to introduce is Tania Duvergne, who is the Director of Public Art for Public Schools in the New York City School Construction Authority. Public Art for Public Schools is the only program dedicated specifically to schools in the country. Duvergne has held this position since 2010 and has overseen the installation of over 180 permanent artworks in schools throughout the 5 boroughs. Prior to her work at Public Art for Public Schools, she worked extensively as a curator, writer, editor, and public art administrator for nonprofit art organizations across the country, including the Hirshhorn Museum in DC, the San Diego Museum of Art, Insight San Diego, Tijuana, and the Artist Space in New York. She holds a bachelor's degree in art from the School of Art Institute of Chicago and a master's degree in art history from the Université de Paris, the Sorbonne. And then we're also joined by Larissa Trinder, who is the Assistant Vice President for New York City Health plus Hospital Arts and Medicine Department. I want to make sure I get that right. The New York City Health plus Hospitals Arts and Medicine Department. She is responsible for the stewardship, exhibition strategy, conservation, and curation of the health system's collection of more than 7,000 works of art, the largest such collection in New York City, many dating back to the 1930s. In addition, she oversees the creation and implementation of evidence-based programs for patients, staff, and the community that utilize the arts as a tool in healing. Previously, Trinder worked at Children's Hospital of the King's Daughter in Norfolk, Virginia, as the director and principal giving, and established the hospital's creative art policy that integrated the arts and cultural programs into the hospital system. She has her master's degree in public policy from New York University's Robert F. Wagner Graduate School of Public Service. I'd like to thank you both, and I will pass the mic to Tania. Thank you.
Thank you, TK. And good afternoon. Thank you for inviting me to participate in this webinar. Okay, so I'm going to screen share. We confirm that the PowerPoint is visible.
Not yet.
Not yet.
Oh, it's spinning. TK, is it sharing now?
Not yet.
I can jump in if you need time, Tanya, for it to spin, but just let me know.
Let me, let's just give this one more time.
Oh, there we go.
Ah, there we go.
Right. Very good. Excellent. So I'm excited to share with you the two amazing and much beloved Romare Bearden murals in the New York City Department of Education's permanent art collection. To begin, I'd like to provide some just general information about the collection and our program. The DOE's, Department of Education's collection consists of over 2,000 artworks located in buildings and on campuses in all 5 New York City boroughs. The majority are site-specific and permanent artworks, the oldest dating back to the late 1800s, and we continue to commission new artworks today. Artworks are made with a variety of media materials and located in various public spaces inside and outside the buildings, as you can see illustrated here with these 9 highlighted artworks. Stylistically, the collection as a whole reflects significant styles and movements in American art history. Most artworks were commissioned through the New York City Art Commission, including the 2 artwork murals by Bearden. The New York City Percent for Art program managed commissions between 1981 and 1989. It was in 1989 that the Public Art for Public Schools program was established. It's currently now a unit of the New York City School Construction Authority, and we oversee commissioning new artworks as well as the care and maintenance of the existing DOE collection. And as TK pointed out, we are the only program in the country specifically dedicated to public art in public schools. It was in the 1970s that Bearden was selected by the New York Art Commission to create murals for 2 school buildings, new school buildings, one in the Bronx and the other in Brooklyn. The first mural created was untitled 1974, located in the entrance lobby 2, at the time Intermediary School 84, now PS 811 in the Bronx. Bearden began working on this mural in 1972, just 1 year after his retrospective exhibition at the Museum of Modern Art. It's made of glass and is presumed to have been fabricated by Cravato Mosaics Incorporated. The school district at that time was, per the Board of Education, quote, overwhelmingly composed of people of Afro-American and Puerto Rican American heritage. Bearden focused his mural design on the relationship between these communities from his very first design proposal. The mural was described in official documents as, quote, depicting the cultural interrelationship of the Puerto Rican and Afro-American people. It features a map projection of Puerto Rico on the left and Africa on the right. Linking the two is the cityscape and the classist Bearden silhouette style. An open book above serves as another reference to uniting these 2 scenes, with a brown figure holding a pencil and a black figure holding tickets. The message of the artwork was intended as promoting racial harmony between the 2 communities. What is very interesting about this commission is the design development Bearden undertook before arriving at this final version. Here's Bearden's first design, submitted to the Art Commission on October 10th, 1972. The artwork in the official documents was described as a ceramic and glass mosaic, 29 feet long by 8, depicting the liberation struggle of the Puerto Rican and Afro-American people. It features portraits of African-American and Latino leaders with their names inscribed at the base, a background of mountains, a mounted gorilla with the Puerto Rican flag, Harriet Tubman with the American flag, and a Pan-American flag on the far right. It's a little bit hard to see in this issue. This version was withdrawn by the New York City Board of Education. We don't have any specifications exactly as to why. So a second design was submitted by Bearden 3 months later in January of 1973. Basically the same design, as you can see, although here we see this design is a little bit further developed. The figures are painted in. They look just more completed. Really nothing has changed in this other than Ida B. Wells in the first submission was changed to Mary Bethune on the right, and Felisa Rinson de Gautier was changed to Pedro Albizu Campon on the left. Now, this commission, as you can see on the screen, was disapproved by the Art Commission. in the official documents. However, they make a note in the letter that was submitted to Bearden with a disapproval, with a quote, "without prejudice to submission of a new design," meaning they're open to redesign. There are no minutes from this meeting, so we're not sure exactly what was discussed. However, in addition to looking at the various proposals themselves and doing sort of the contrast, which we'll see more of in the next image, just aesthetically speaking, there is a letter by Art Commission member Charles Alston, who clearly states in this letter his desire for the mural to feel more characteristic of Bearden's work. He makes reference to the local school board's desire to have the children of their community see important Black and Puerto Rican leaders in an artwork, but he states his understanding that the desires of these two participants, let's say, in the process are very complex, and that marrying civic and aesthetic ideas can be challenging. I paraphrase a bit there. Okay. A third design was submitted 3 months later. Again, now it's April 4th, 1973. The text that was included in the submission referred to the artwork description as the cultural relationship of the Puerto Rican and Afro-American people. So that even just the description has begun to change. Aesthetically and visually, as you can all see, the mural changed significantly from the previous two submissions. It's much more schematic. The two communities that Bearden wanted to portray remain at its core. However, the portraits have been completely removed and they've been replaced by these map projections. And the only portraits now in the work are of these two figures at the top in the opened book that resemble, in my opinion, more students rather than adults. Additionally, we have the now, I will say, New York City-like, if not New York City cityscape that joins the two communities. The introduction of the cityscape too, I think geographically grounds the artwork in the community of the school in New York City in a way that the previous versions did not. And the two students or the images of these two figures at the top create a more direct reference to the mural's location of being in a school learning environment. This next image here is a study that we found of this mural, or that was created, we believe, for this mural. Data is unknown. It's an interesting iteration to look at, because what we see here is how Bearden was still looking to maybe include these portraits in the final version, but that we see eventually, here I'm going to switch back, were taken out for these two figures. So I just think very interesting to see the design development and the evolution of the ideas that he was beginning with at the very end, at the very start of his design process. This image is an image in the official documentation showing the artwork at the time of its actual completion. I'm going to skim through. Here's a few details of the artwork showing the mosaic work and the detailing, and how that mosaic work can really help to bring out different features, which I think are really important to Bearden's work, and the translation of his work from paper, collage, et cetera, into this new medium, for him at least, of mosaics, and the importance of that relationship between him and the fabricator. This is just, I think, a beautiful, beautiful detail. We have that figure. I believe this image of the cityscape also serves to illustrate that point about the relationship and the rendering of these images and the collaboration that takes place between the mosaic fabricator and the artist creator, where how important and how much more to the point is the artwork made by using these very deliberate grid-like forms for the creation of the buildings, and then it's totally different feel of the and line work of the mosaic within the sky behind it. Okay, moving on. Bearden's second mural was installed 3 years later in 1977, and it's titled Daily Activities in the Neighborhood. This piece was created for PS 346 in Brooklyn, and like the Bronx mural, is also located in the entrance lobby, slightly different lobby context, but basically the entrance lobby. It's also made of glass mosaic and was also fabricated by Cravado Mosaics. Here the fabricator is confirmed, however, because their name is actually included on the mosaic near this piece, that the first piece did not have Bearden's signature. See a visual of that in the upcoming slides. The artwork was described in the official submission as depicting the function of day-to-day activities in the schools and neighborhoods. Drop the word schools for the title of the artwork. As you can see, this mural is aesthetically much more like Bearden's work as a whole, reflecting his use of collage and his signature stylistic rendering of cityscapes, building figures, and objects, and sort of multiple scenes happening at once. The mosaic fabrication beautifully parallels the feel of his collage work, not only with the different types of colors and types of glass mosaic tesserae, but also in the textures and the line work, which again, we'll see more of in the upcoming details. Contrary to the Bronx mural, Bearden's preliminary design for this project was approved on its initial submission. The only notable change from this design that we're seeing here in black and white and the final are the figures here on the left, if you can all see my cursor, where this one figure is standing, bending over, and this figure is seated, whereas in the final version, they're both standing up. But basically all of the rest of the components are the same. Here's an image of the artwork installed in situ at the time of its completion. And so beginning from left to right, which I think is also just an interesting thought process that I had as I was putting together this presentation. It's like reading a story, which I think is a lot about Bearden's, about narratives and stories. Not necessarily that it's linear from left to right or there's a start and finish, but there's something that's happening that's making the viewer's eye, I think, move through this dialogue in a very interesting way. So we see these buildings, the classic Bearden classic brick building here on the left, and these figures who are standing on top of this other building overlooking the cityscape below. Again, the cityscape here being very reminiscent of the cityscape used in the Bronx artwork. Here, these figures, I'm going to venture to guess, maybe mother and child reading a book, another set of books at their feet. So they're reading this book and then they're looking out on the cityscape, but they're also looking out upon what we refer to here, thanks to my team, we've called now the thought bubble. It feels like all of these things contain in this bubble of imagery and creativity and imagination that may or may not be coming from what the child is reading or just thinking about in general, or suggestive of what perhaps books and education and reading can be for students and for adults. Within the bubble, we see references and symbols to all kinds of different subjects and concentrations of learning, such as history, biology, engineering, chemistry, math. This particular vignette, I feel, or we sort of nicknamed the westward expansion. It feels like a history of, or an interpretation or segments from. I think there's a lot that could be sort of pulled apart and sort of what Bearden is selecting to use and how he's using them. Followed by, oh, this is just a beautiful detail I wanted to share. The Indigenous person here. Next is a compilation of different details here, these books and the symbol of the globe and the world, again, reminiscent of the Bronx piece. We have this parrot on a branch on a leaf, is about nature, biology. We have this perhaps petri dish, microscope, reference to maybe color theory happening in this area. And then this last section here on the right, science and mathematics, engineering, chemistry. Bearden was a student of mathematics. I believe he got his degree from the New York University, from NYU in mathematics. So again, I think highly featured here, all the different elements, what fun it was, and to really kind of go back and think through what each one of these elements references. My abacus to, I wanted to point out up here is an airplane. Here, this particular shot has it cut off, unfortunately, but this is a rocket taking off. To the beacon, to the lightning bolts, the number lines, abacus, the history of math, calculations, etc. That's just really exciting and wonderful to look at how he sort of captured and symbolized all of these ideas with his very unique style and aesthetic. Here's just a great detail of that beacon. Here's a detail of Romare's signature within the mosaic, which is handled in a very interesting way and unique, I think, for other mosaics in the collection that we have, where it's kind of purposefully broken apart from the background. And I'm going to conclude with this last image, which is the same mural we've been speaking about, but now with probably what is the most important part about this entire process and these artworks and their placement in the schools in particular, or in public settings, I say in general, sort of in a broader context for this talk, is the children that are standing in front of it. To me, this is one of my absolute favorite images to share, and I share it with all panelists when we begin an artist selection process, because I think it just reminds us of what the purpose of what we're doing is to create something for these students in their school experience. At its core, I hope, is to enhance, or I aim, is to enhance the experience of a school for the students, but also for faculty, staff, parents, and communities who are in school buildings. And that when we are commissioning artists for school projects, the goal is that the artwork to be, for the artwork to be uplifting, inspiring, educational in some way, right? I think all art is educational, but, and beautiful. Often the artwork takes on a role as an identifier for the school and something that the students are really proud of. And our hope is that every student not only know about the artwork, but at some time throughout their time in a school, that a teacher uses the artwork as some sort of educational tool to expand their minds, and not necessarily just as an art class, but in all sorts of different subject matter. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, Tania. Larissa, are you ready?
I think so. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, great. So thank you, everyone. It's delightful to be here today. I'm excited to share a little bit about the cityscape piece that Romare Bearden did for our initially hospital in the Bronx, and where it lives today in Bellevue Hospital in Manhattan. A little context to provide before we get started. So New York City Health and Hospitals is the largest public safety net hospital in the country. And with that is a great responsibility. We don't turn anyone away, regardless of their ability to pay. And so we serve the largest population of undocumented immigrants, people experiencing homelessness, behavioral health, and many other populations. And so it's really a tremendous opportunity and obligation that we have, that we're here. So this piece, I think, sort of expands upon Tania's wonderful presentation. It's actually Charles Alston. It's in Harlem Hospital, and it's a mosaic around the time that we're going to be talking about cityscape. But the way that the art collection at Health and Hospitals is utilized is to take these 7,000 pieces dating back to the 1930s and equitably distribute them throughout our 11 acute care facilities and over 67 clinics in order to create what we sort of started to call healing environments. And there's a lot of evidence that these kinds of experiences really impact public health. So it's with great intentionality that these artworks are placed in patient areas and many staff areas as well. So we have a Keith Haring mural. This is, of course, also a peer of Romare Bearden's, and this piece is in our Woodhull Hospital in Brooklyn. Keith Haring did this in the 80s and then died a couple of years later, but it also is really an incredible piece to see, but he was able to really highlight and create a large awareness for AIDS during that time. And then, of course, today we have a very robust community mural program. And we had a beautiful mural done by an artist named Amanda Finkapakata for our Judson Pride Clinic over here on the left. But her work as well became very popular and famous during the pandemic and raising awareness and empathy for Chinese immigrants after there was a lot of hate crimes going on. So again, just sort of the important role that that art can play in amplifying complex issues. So this is, as we're moving up towards Bearden, this is actually an Abram Champagnier 16 panel of Alice in New York City installation that was a very immersive experience put into the Gouverneur Children's long-term tuberculosis ward back in the 30s. And There's a long history for another webinar around this piece, but it really served a very, very strategic purpose, which was to distract the children while they were there, delight and entertain them. And the pictures and images are of Alice all over New York City. We're almost done restoring all of them and thinking about where those will be placed next. But this whole idea of immersive experiences and creating environments for distraction in healthcare was really important. So Romare Bearden's piece is really kind of a fantastic background. It was initially placed in Lincoln Hospital at a very sort of tumultuous time in that hospital's history. So in the 70s, the hospital was not really doing its job, and it was ultimately taken over by the Young Lords, which were originally a Chicago gang. And they formed an effort to seize the hospital, and as a result, really turned it around. And so it was at this time that Bearden had been asked to develop a piece for the new wing. And this was coming off a lot of what Tania was discussing during that time of this beautiful mural he had created in PS, what is now PS 811, where he showcased, as you saw in that, just sort of the beautiful relationship between the Puerto Rican community and the African-American community. And so when he did this one, after having that experience, when he developed Cityscape, there was a lot of controversy, and a city councilman named Ramon Velez very, very vocally protested the piece, calling it dark, calling it it excluded Puerto Rican individuals in it, and it really was not what they were looking for this brand new hospital, brand new rebirth. And instead, it was looked at as sort of a hopelessness, and really was not creating the kind of solidarity that the previous mural that Tania referenced did. So they moved it. They moved it out of Lincoln Hospital after 1 week. It went into our art storage in 1976, did not surface again until 1983, in which it was placed in Bellevue Hospital, which is also really interesting because Bellevue Hospital was the same facility where Romare Bearden recovered from his nervous breakdown in the 50s. So to sort of have it now in a place that ultimately healed him is really sort of interesting. And it's in this long hallway leading up to the chapels, and just as in a very, very public space. The other sort of interesting thing is that when after he had his nervous breakdown and he was into music and doing all sorts of different things, it was his wife, Nanette, that really said, you need to go back to painting. You need to get more focused on sort of public works. And he did a really an untitled, interesting piece for the Carlisle Hotel for the presidential space suite. So he really started to get back out into doing public pieces. And this is where the piece has resided since. But some of the elements that are sort of interesting and that were somewhat controversial was that he, in all three of the murals, he placed the homeless man. And in Cityscape, he did it sort of at the very end, enshrouded in newspaper, and sort of that was kind of controversial at the time. But, he also just very characteristically reflected the urban setting that he has in his previous works. And so you see, again, from the images Tania showed, you see the cityscape and just sort of the reflecting life at the time. But this piece for him was much more deeply personal than some of the other ones. And it really was a time in his life that I think he was exploring a lot of other things. And then this is just a really wonderful, I think, image of it, because you can sort of see the depth of the collaging over here and just sort of all of the different elements that went into it. So thank you.
Thank you so much. And I'll jump in and add my little 2 cents. If you give me 1 second, I will share my screen. I'm going to talk about Bearden's mural that was formerly in Atlanta. Can everybody see that okay?
Yes.
Wonderful. So I'm going to just do this. The mural was made in was made to honor MLK in the 1970s, and it was put on a building that no longer exists. So this mural no longer exists, called the Cuts Building, which for many, many years was a department store in South downtown Atlanta. This mural no longer exists, as I said. It now exists as 2 kind of maquettes, one very rudimentary one that I have an image of for you. This one here is in the High Museum's collection. And there's a more formal one in Clark Atlanta University Art Museum's collection, which is where I first had my experience engaging with it. And as you can see from this image, he is, of course, using that kind of cut collage block style that, especially in this mural, works kind of like kente cloth. And you can see his kind of homage to Adinkra symbols, but also his deconstructing and homage to the American flag, the red bars, the blue. In the finalized mural, there are windows. There's also the family structure, the church, and of course, a figurative depiction of MLK. Here's a picture of him with Mayor Jackson. And what's most curious to me about this mural is the way in which it represented such a shift in Atlanta's history. Romare Bearden's relationship with Atlanta and with the South in general was close and intimate. He did travel to Atlanta quite a bit. He did travel through the South quite a bit. He was born in the South, and his grandparents had lived in the South. And his relationship specifically to Atlanta probably began with the Atlanta Annuals, what Hale Woodruff started at what was then Atlanta University and is now Clark Atlanta University. His first participation in it, and then his very public rejection of it as an annual that was what they called segregated. It was an annual that was created for Black artists, and it brought in work from as many figures as you could imagine. Elizabeth Catlett, Jacob Lawrence were winners, Richmond Barté. This annual, which had, I believe it ran for 30 or 40 years, eventually lost in popularity over time, specifically the 50s, 60s, when Black artists were pushing to be in white spaces. So, you know, he had been traveling to Atlanta, seeing art and engaging the art community there for years by the time the 70s rolled around, and he was invited to create this mural for MLK. And this isn't just directly after MLK had died. This is in the kind of boiled renaissance of a Black mayor, Black businesses thriving, Black people fighting for space, and this kind of new energy that was happening in Atlanta that put the Black population face forward. This is, of course, pre-Atlanta child murders. This is pre-John Lewis being elected to Congress, but there is this upswell of Black racial pride and the beginning of what will become today's Atlanta, which is an extremely, it's a urban development, urban sprawl happens very quickly in Atlanta. And this period, you're really seeing that this as both a marker of Black pride, but also the generator of urban sprawl and displacement of certain people. And just to expand upon that, I think the role of that mural and the role of murals in general is something really interesting to bring into this conversation. Bearden's relationship with Atlanta. This is a photograph by Jim Alexander, who is a famous Atlanta-based photographer, of Bearden coming out of the Neighborhood Arts Center, which is now the Atlanta Arts Exchange. This art center where classes were taught and community met is famous historically for connecting so many different artists and teaching, you know, and so the fact that Bearden had a relationship here speaks to his larger purpose in visiting Atlanta and making this mural, because still at this time, the High was fairly segregated. The High Museum of Art is, of course, the large encyclopedic institution in Atlanta, in Georgia, and artists like Romare Bearden could not show there. And so community spaces like this were essential for Black artists and essential for Black artists who wanted proper training. So it's beautiful to see him engaging people this way, especially since he was a social worker. And so I think him making public art is almost an extension of his larger vocation as a Black person living in the 20th century. He was a public facing artist. And that is exemplary in just how many exhibitions, just how well he has been canonized is because he made himself very visible and very vocal over time, just as much as he was supported and made visible and vocal by the art establishment and by the Black communities that he existed in. And so I'd like to stop sharing and open the conversation up by asking both of our esteemed panelists to speak a little bit about the legacies of these murals, of these objects. Larissa specific, you told us that your mural was moved after a week and stored away. I want us to start the conversation kind of talking about what it means for these objects to go away and what it means to kind of maintain these objects, to restore them, and then to try to give them new life as buildings take on new iterations. So I'll leave it there.
Yeah, no, that's a wonderful question. And, we have a lot of artwork in storage, and I don't even like saying that because I'd rather it be out in the public. We certainly have a lot out in public as well. But that is for a number of reasons that you just touched upon, TK. And, we are a hospital system and we're not a museum. And so the care of the collection is obviously very expensive and very important. And we have a director of the art collection who really does a great job of stewarding that and thinking about that. But, when pieces come into storage, it's interesting to know, and I was thinking about Cityscape, I don't actually know why they suddenly decided, maybe you do, to put it in Bellevue. But, we have pieces that ultimately, for whatever reason is going on in the world, that we think about, and we think, oh, let's take that Raphael Tofino piece and now let's put that out, because there's a big conversation going on right now around the people in that Puerto Rican community, for example. So there's just all sorts of wonderful ways we can sort of use the art, and we have the most diverse patient population and staff population in the world with over 180 languages. So, having a diverse art collection that we'd love to continue to even have more diverse is really, really critical and plays a very essential role on public health.
I'll add on to that. For the schools, the artworks are permanent. So it sort of presents a total opposite situation of Bearden's piece in the hospital, the possibility of being it removed. Yes, there is always a risk that something happened to a building and the risk that happens to the art, but the intent is for the artworks, as we say at our commissioning meetings, to last the lifetime of the building. As I was preparing for this webinar, it dawned on me, like, these artworks are 50 years old or about to be 50 years old. Like, that is a long time for an artwork to be in the public realm, exposed to what that means. And for our audience members who may not be familiar or have stepped foot in a public school, or any school for that matter, a long time, wow, is that a challenging environment for anything to exist for 50 years is what I'd like to say. So I'm thrilled that these two murals are in as great a shape as they are, but keeping them there and extending their life to be able to go on from generation represents its own sort of challenges over time. I want to share a couple of anecdotes, though, about extending the life of the artwork and what happens over time with these artworks. With the artwork in the Bronx, when I first started in my position here, there was going to be a feature about that artwork and the collection. And so I visited the school and got to know the piece. And upon entering into the lobby, I realized, wow, the lobby was like a cacophony of posters and imagery and artwork. And I realized after things began to soak in, at first I saw the mural and then all these other items, I realized that they were posters that were created by students at the school in response to the artwork. And after talking with representatives from the school, had found that at that time, it was part of their curriculum to have every student create a poster at the end of, I think it was at the end of the time, their 5th grade year, they had to create a poster about the mural. And so you had all these different voices over time, thinking about this one artwork, like one that is the goal of this. 100%, like a perfect example, but also showing how the work still lives on and how thoughts and interpretations of work can change over time. And I think one of Bearden's maybe best qualities in terms of the public art arena is sort of the essentials of what his work is about as a whole. It is global, it is diverse, it is about wholeness, it's about harmony. So that, to me, all of those underpinnings of his work throughout his entire career and how that translates in the public realm make for really, really positive and effective public artworks.
Yeah, and I think, Tanya, thinking about the relevancy that they have maybe still today. So when you think about his 1974 piece he did in the Berkeley City Council chamber, that very much reflected the free speech movement at the time. And yet it still is a very relevant message and image today. So when you're talking about the children looking at these pieces, and you showed us a lot of great detail in your presentation, those are really very timeless images and very timeless things. And anyone who lives in New York City or has been here knows in the cityscape piece as well, and these three pieces that really reflect an urban landscape, whether frankly it's Atlanta or any urban landscape, but those are really, those images really resonate with you.
I would add into that conversation. I think for bringing up the mural, I'm referencing the one in Atlanta that doesn't exist anymore.
Right.
That being associated with a vocation like education, like social work, like public policy, gives it a different kind of value, even though we've seen murals disappear in these spaces before. There's still a kind of charge to protect them because they're associated with a kind of public good. But in a cityscape, to be hilarious, in a cityscape like Atlanta specifically, these objects are vulnerable. And I think of this object more so in relationship to things like the Wall of Respect, where you understand that you are creating a work of art that is meant to engage particular communities and meant to inspire and uplift and honor, but understanding that just because of the ways that cities move, and of course this was on a commercial building, right? Like, because of the way that cities move, these objects cannot last. And what that kind of means long term, they could have saved the mural. They chose not to. It's something I'm kind of contending with as we now think about organizations like Living Walls, which is the organization that has evolved out of the organization that originally commissioned this piece. Now Atlanta is full of murals and full of public art, and that has become a tourist attraction and also a generator of gentrification in certain areas. What is the balance to be stricken between racial, cultural, ethnic, economic uplift and ephemerality and capitalism, for lack of a better word?
Yeah.
I have a quick question, if I may, just to clarify what the mural in Atlanta, it was painted on the facade of the building. Is that
Yes.
correct? Right.
Yes.
So removal becomes extremely difficult. Saving the piece and in that context really becomes very challenging. And I think the didactics and sort of definitions of permanency, temporality, how artworks are commissioned, how long they're supposed to be in place, all of the resurgence of questioning what permanence is, should things be permanent, on many fronts in the last 5 years, I think are all very relevant. And I think the selection of these works that we're talking about here today, again, just points to Bearden's
Brilliance.
uniqueness, right? That he touched on all these things that now in 2023.
Well, I think too, thinking about the digital age, the beautiful thing is that, even murals that have been gone, if we can digitize them, and we've done that on our Bloomberg Connect app and our website, in order to make sure that any of our community murals that come in now that may have maybe only a few years in their life for varying reasons, we are documenting them, bringing them into the collection, documenting who that artist was, so that there is that kind of legacy. But I will say it's very interesting thinking about murals today, because we are looking at more permanent, things like mosaics and things that will last a little bit longer, just because of the nature of a healthcare environment. And so there is a fine balance between all of that. Absolutely.
And I think subject matter, I think different things can be explored in different ways. Very significantly between temporary and permanent work. I mean, not only are we working in school, so that sort of predicates a certain parameter of subject matter, right, that can be dealt with, and also that if it's supposed to be timeless or last 100 years, like sort of what is the relevance of picking up sort of a political topic today? Again, Bearden is maybe an exception, and that the temporary arena is really where you have that freedom to explore, but yet how I think that's interesting too, to bring up the digital component of it, so it sort of maintains its history and its legacy over time and doesn't just sort of disappear because of its temporality. TK?
Could you both speak to the accessibility of these works of art in the institutions that they're in? You know, like they're in and associated with a particular institution, but they are considered public works. Do you find that, and I ask this based on the digital, the expansion into the digital that makes the work more accessible. Do you find that because it's in a hospital or because it's in a school, it is less accessible? Or do you find that because of particularly where it's placed, more people are able to be exposed to Bearden's work and even go further and say to Bearden as an artist or a cultural figure?
Tanya, you want me to go?
Go ahead.
You know, I think that's really, really an interesting question, but to answer it as succinctly as I can, in the hospital system, some are in public spaces, some are not. Obviously, you cannot go into a pediatric oncology clinic on a daily basis unless you're a patient or a family member or a staff member. That being said, many, if not the majority of our WPA murals are in public spaces, and Harlem Hospital has an amazing mural pavilion. You can go in, and also Bellevue Hospital. And so all of these spaces, and we do have that identified. We're working on kind of working through a process of having a digitized map that will identify those so that the public can go. And I often have, I'm sure Tanya does too, academics and educators that come from all over the world to really sort of research and see these pieces up close, because they are such an incredible representative of that time period. And I'm thinking really just quickly of the Georgette Seabrook mural we have in Harlem Hospital, Recreation of Harlem, that is just an incredibly beautiful reflection of that time period. So, but I know that in a school system, Tanya, I'm sure that you have similar access, but not so much, because now in this day and age, people can't just go into schools anymore because of the complexities that happen with different things around gun violence or whatever. Yeah.
100%. And that is exactly the same answer we have. Well, although all our artworks are in public spaces in the schools, I call it public, but not public. Like, it's hugely public for those that can enter that building. And like I mentioned before, it's not just for the students, but for faculty, for staff, for parents and community members who often use school buildings during after school hours for all kinds of things. But at the same time, one must have permission to enter that building. And that has obviously become far more strict in the past few years. We, of course, facilitate that. Anyone who's interested, to contact us, and we can make arrangements for that to happen. But we absolutely don't want anyone walking into or thinking that they can walk into a school just to look at an artwork. So it's sort of both.
Thank you both. I asked that kind of cheekily because I work for the Barnes Foundation in Philadelphia, and we consider ourselves for the public good, but we have an entry fee. There are barriers to actually get to the artwork that exists, and not only that, in this particular institution, we don't loan work, so there is a geographical kind of boundary, and I love the idea of kind of breaking down what we mean when we say public, because of these actual real inaccessible, these boundaries that do exist that keep us from this work. And also because of people like us who have the institutional power to protect, preserve, and promote these works, or keep them in kind of storage, keep them behind, allow them to fall into disrepair. So much effort goes behind just placing a work in where anyone can touch it. I mean, especially kids. Like, so much work goes into keeping these objects alive. And so I appreciate the work that you do. And I think it's pretty much time for us to move into Q&A.
Thank you all. This conversation, the intersection of Bearden and public art, is truly making me smile from ear to ear. I'm so happy that I could listen to all of you talk with each other, and I certainly have questions for you, and I know that the audience might as well. So would you be willing to take a couple questions?
Of course.
All right, so we have one from an anonymous attendee that says, thanks for these great presentations. Know that the Bearden specialists on the call are excited. Considering that Bearden's cousin Alston was a muralist of Harlem Hospital in 1936 and worked with another colleague, Hale Woodruff, Have you thought about the compositional conversations and exchanges among Romare Bearden's murals and others, including the well-known Mexican muralist? It would be great to share these kinds of ways that artists learn from and influence each other within the public sphere.
I feel like TK would be great to answer that. I'm thinking of Diego Rivera's pieces that came in, and it highly influenced a lot of the initial WPA murals. But I'm sure that you have a lot more knowledge in this space than I do.
Well, no, actually, I don't. And but I love the question, and I love that
Me too.
we can sit here and contemplate this together, because one of the things that at Clark Atlanta University Art Museum, we kind of contended over where was he getting these Adinkra-like symbols? Was he making some kind of homage to a quilt or kente cloth? Was he thinking about all of these things at once? You know, his influence specifically, I think, is really from that generational shift between all of these Black artists working in abstract expressionist work and then the realities of Black life in the 20th century. So many artists transferred back to figurative political work, including Romare Bearden, who started making increasingly more figurative and increasingly more personal artwork. The collage, the concept of quilting, the concept of kente, like that layering something over something else, to quote many people in regard to Bearden, that kind of aesthetic seems to me to be something that is unique to his overall practice, something that has carried through the through line of his practice in a way that I would almost argue to say there is less influence we can see in his public art. But I don't know, we can fight about it. I'm willing and able to learn.
I think to your point, and in addition, not about fighting about it, but specifically to Alston, and it's, again, preparation for this webinar, sort of digging into our files and then digging deeper, and sort of love the mysteries to be solved when it comes to art creation. But Alston in particular, and his involvement and relationship with Bearden and his involvement on the Art Commission, there's clearly lots of conversations that are happening. Bearden, along with many other artists, opened up their own art spaces, and we're definitely in conversation with one another. I found in the documentation the actual contract Bearden signed for the first work, where he named Ernest Critchlow as the artist to take over should anything ever happen to him and he's not able to complete the artwork. And I thought, wow, that just says also sort of what those interconnections between artists, especially African-American artists in New York City at that time. They were super tightly close-knit. They all knew what each other were doing, and that they all were sort of mixing in the same circles and arriving kind of at very interesting solutions, whether it be within the public art realm in these types of commissions, or just in the production of their own individual work. Like Alston has an artwork in our collection as well, a few years later.
Great. I definitely have a question. So I'm thinking a lot, especially today, artists working in the public art sphere often find themselves fulfilling or being expected to fulfill roles beyond the artist. So some of these roles might include being the activist, the community organizer, the social change instigator. And what I wanted to ask you, and TK, maybe you can lead this, Tania and Larissa, I'm sure you have, examples of this with contemporary artists, but do you think that Bearden saw himself in any of these roles or even wanted that sort of responsibility placed on him?
I would say yes. I think he definitely saw himself as a mover and a shaker within the arts world, not the larger arts world, but specifically Black cultural art channels. He, as you said, Tania, he was in community with lots of art. So many artists, so many art historians, have sat at the feet of Bearden. And to talk about the kind of intimate relationships he had with all of these people, Ruth Fine and Mary Schmidt Campbell, these are people who not only knew him as an artist, but knew him as a person, knew his wife, and knew the work intimately. I think that defining that kind of line between what Romare Bearden means to a kind of 20th century Black art world And then what he has come to mean to a larger art world in general is something to be kind of, it's something to think about. It's something to seriously consider, because he worked as a social worker for the majority of his life. I mean, it took someone, I believe it was his wife, who said, you need to just paint, like stuff.
Yeah, she did.
Stop.
And some people didn't
You
even
know.
know he was a social, like, people didn't know he compartmentalized his life, that they didn't realize he was a pretty renowned artist while he was doing his social work.
And his family, he comes from a political, socially engaged family. Like this was a public figure in multiple sense of the word. And so for him, I think that model that he may have created probably is what's hurting contemporary artists in expecting them to do the same kind of work he was able to do because of his class and mobility and connection and network, and also the networks that are formed specifically because of segregation, that no longer are forming those same types of tight-knit communities.
So do you think he could have been a little bit torn, though, with his with the obligation he had to sort of reinforce and share all of the things and topics that you just brought up politically, but also he sort of referenced to the Berkeley mural as being sort of this aesthetic success that Mary Schmitz Campbell talks about in her book, and him being sort of like, yeah, it's an aesthetic success, meaning like people like to look at it. And then when he went into the cityscape and for Lincoln, it was a much more personal sort of experience and more of almost a private one. So I don't know if he at that time, and maybe the Bearden specialists on the phone, on the call today might know, really thought about that more as a public mural, even though it was an apparent, and so there's a lot of conflicting, I think, things that an artist of his stature probably confront on a daily basis, because they're obligated to share and reflect and amplify complex things happening in the world. But they're also, he was a very talented artist, as you said, musician. He gave a try at being a musician for many years, and as a social worker and community activist. And so, he played a lot of different roles, and I do think they were ultimately reflected in his work, whether he wanted it or not. But
and I would just add to that, but his work is also really wonderful, right? It's like he had that, as you were just kind of, both of you have hit upon, like the work was really strong, and he was an artist. He studied all of the masters and sort of all these different time periods, and created really wonderful work to look at, curious work. And then maybe the struggle between what's his internal work and what's the public work is maybe what the contemporary artists are struggling with today, but also that there is work. It's not just an idea that he's using or promoting. He has his work, and the idea, for me, I look at him as like, it was all integrated. It wasn't sort of picking, choosing, or making one work for the other. They all were sort of embodied in his work as a whole, like life work and artwork.
Excellent, thank you. And maybe one more question. It seems that Bearden had a strong relationship with Mayor Maynard Jackson in Atlanta through his work on the mural downtown and gallery at the Neighborhood Arts Center. Did he have similar relationships with other mayors, particularly in New York City, where he created the murals that were discussed today? Or I would also add, other relationships with like leaders at the hospital or within the schools, things like that.
Well, Charles Alston, I learned only yesterday, was his cousin in New York City, and who sat on the art commission. Again, there was a lot happening all at the same time. The mayor specifically in the art commissioning process at that time was not directly involved. It was the art commission. So yes, he had a direct link there and family connection there, but and just doing peripheral research and other projects. Like what I loved is that he had a personal connection to a lot of the spaces where he created some of his best public work, I think, right? He lived there, he knew people there, he visited there, just as UTK pointed out about Atlanta. And Larissa, I think your piece too, without sort of like that whole knowing what was going to end up, where it was going to end up. But I think a certain affinity, and certainly his pre-med work that he had begun studying at Boston University. So I think there's always a connection, but mayoral in New York, not as far as I know. Larissa, are you familiar with any kind of connection to the mayor's office or political entities for the commissioning of your piece?
no, except what a couple things. One of the things that Catherine brought up, the Charles Alston piece, has a mural at Harlem Hospital called Magic and Medicine. And, you know, it really talks a lot about how the history of medicine and how it came from, you know, all these different things from the past. And then now we have this modern medicine. And so that is often used by our teams and our leaders at Harlem Hospital to sort of introduce to young residents this idea of art observation. So there's all sorts of applications, but back to the other question, you know, I mean, all of these, including this one, yes, there is some ephemera related to the negotiation or statement with the Public Design Commission and some other areas, but not any other than the controversy with Councilman Velez in the 70s with Lincoln's installation. Not that I'm aware of with anything with his specific pieces related to cityscape.
Great. Well, with that, we're right at 2 o'clock. And I think this conversation has served as a wonderful first chapter in talking more about Bearden's public artworks. I want to remind all of our viewers that this conversation has been recorded and it's going to be on the WPI's website as soon as we can get it up there. Please go to the WPI website and check out all of the work that we're doing on the Romare Bearden Catalogue Raisonné. And I have to add, go out and see these amazing public artworks if you can. Bearden has them pretty well spread across the US, but mostly in New York City, and it's beautiful outside. So head outside and go see them. But thank you to our speakers, TK, Larissa, Tania, thank you so much. And I look forward to learning more about this topic.